The Freedom Riders were multi-race activists who protested segregation in interstate bus terminals in the South from 1947 to 1961 to fight for their right to sit anywhere, as segregation was unconstitutional. Despite facing violence and arrest, they were dedicated to gaining rights, as they had the responsibility to protest for Black communities, which led to the integration of bus services in November 1961. The Freedom Rides were primarily influenced by three Supreme Court rulings: the 1946 Morgan v. Commonwealth, the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education, and the 1960 Boynton v. Virginia ruling. They ordered that segregation in interstate bus terminals, including facilities and bus seating, was unconstitutional, but they were ignored in the South. In 1947, the Freedom Rides were first conceived, and the Fellowship of Reconciliation assembled a non-segregated bus ride through state lines to try a 1946 Supreme Court ruling. The first Freedom Ride was originally called the Journey of Reconciliation. Black and white activists wanted equal rights in interstate transportation. In 1947, the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, was formed. It was formed on Mahatma Gandhi's proposition of nonviolent disagreement. CORE was one of the main stars of the Freedom Rides. Post to World War II, civil rights movements sought equal rights and integration for Black people through a combination of federal action and local activism. James Farmer was a figurehead in the civil rights movement, and in 1961 he assisted in the organization of the first Freedom Ride. John Lewis was also one of the 13 main Freedom Riders. He was also the first to get beaten in the Freedom Rides. The first ride started on May 4, 1961. 13 riders boarded two buses in Washington, D.C., setting off to New Orleans. When they passed through Virginia, they faced many arrests. When they got to Rock Hill, North Carolina, they were met with much violence, which sparked a lot of attention to news coverages. The rides continued, and on the 14th of May, riders arrived in a Trailways bus at Anniston, Alabama. The bus was attacked by a furious mob that carried many violent weapons such as knives, guns, and others. The riders wanted to continue past the bus station, but one of the tires was slashed. A window had been broken, leading to a firebomb being thrown through the window. Fortunately, the riders got out in time and safely before the bus was up in flames. Connor, a commissioner of public safety, said no policemen were in sight as the buses arrived because they were visiting their mothers on Mother's Day. He also said, "I am now saying to these meddlers from out of our city, the best thing for them to do is stay out if they don't want to get slapped in jail." Many news stories and photos about the violence appeared throughout the world. Jim Peck, one of the riders who got attacked, said, "This mob seized us and I was unconscious, I'd say within a minute. I came to an alleyway. Nobody was there. A big pool of blood. I looked at that pool of blood and I said, I wonder whether I'm going to live or die." He received nearly 50 stitches after the attack. Since they couldn't ride due to bus drivers refusing to drive, they decided to fly to New Orleans for a rally that they were participating in. Threats of bombing stopped flights from taking off. Attorney Kennedy demanded that a flight takes off. On May 24th, riders arrived at Jackson, Mississippi, and they faced arrest, in which they had to go to the Parchman Prison. The Parchman Prison was the worst jail in Mississippi. The riders faced around 2 months of jail and many fees, where they had to work in the prison to pay them off.
We must now fill the jail and be willing to remain for at least a minimum of 60 days.
Attorney General Kennedy announced that the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, would pause the Freedom Riders for a while due to the increasing chaos. After the unrest, bus drivers for Greyhound and Trailways refused to transport the Freedom Riders. On May 29, 1961, the Kennedy administration said that it had urged the Interstate Commerce Commission, ICC, to stop segregation in its facilities. However, segregation still existed, especially in Alabama, where the violence against Freedom Riders was most intense. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "You will never make it through Alabama." Many people in Alabama opposed desegregation, which pushed the riders to continue their journey on the buses. They were determined to fight for their equal rights and would not give up. On November 1st, the ICC's decision made segregation on interstate transportation and facilities illegal. Passengers could sit wherever they wanted on buses. Signs that labeled areas as whites only and colored were taken down at bus terminals, restrooms, and waiting rooms. Lunch counters also had to serve everyone regardless of their race. Diana Nash, a Freedom Rides organizer, said, "Traveling in the segregated South for Black people was humiliating. The very fact that there were separate facilities was to say to Black people and white people that Blacks were so subhuman and so inferior that we could not even use public facilities that white people used." The rights that Black and white activists had been fighting for were confirmed on September 22, 1961. After this announcement, people rode on desegregated buses, ate at integrated lunch counters, and sat in waiting rooms without fear of discrimination. These actions marked an important moment in American history, showing determination of those who fought against segregation and injustice. The efforts of the Freedom Riders and their supporters helped make significant progress in the civil rights movement, leading to changes that aimed for equality for all. With so many people disagreeing, a lot of protesters got hurt or arrested. Many fights broke out between people who were for it and those who were against it. Although the regulation of desegregation was enforced, it was still ignored in Alabama. Violence kept on going, as Martin Luther King Jr. had said previously. KKK, a white supremacist group, had arranged a violent encounter for some of the riders there. Bull Connor, who was a safety commissioner, and Tom Cook, who was a police sergeant, knew about this, and they said they would allow an angry mob to attack the riders until they demanded the police to stop it as a show of it being illegal now. Although the FBI had told the general about this happening, neither gave knowledge to the incoming riders about what was going to happen when they arrived. They soon inspired many more protests and activism, and all of these accomplishments later pressured the government to take action. Professor Raymond Arsenault said, "The riders' dangerous passage through the bus terminals and jails of the Jim Crow South represented only one part of an extended journey for justice that stretched back to the dawn of American history and beyond. But once that passage was complete, there was renewed hope that the nation would eventually find its way to a true and inclusive democracy." The Freedom Riders later influenced the passing of the 1964 Rights Act, outlawing segregation all over the nation, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, getting rid of obstacles to Black voter registration. 60 years later, they also influenced the Black Lives Matter strike, which protested for equal Black rights. The Freedom Riders were multi-race activists who protested segregation in interstate bus terminals in the South from 1947 to 1961 to fight for the right to sit anywhere, as segregation was unconstitutional. Despite facing violence and arrest, they were dedicated to gaining rights, as they had the responsibility to protest for Black communities, which led to the integration of bus services in November 1961. They marked an important moment in Black history as well as American history. They made notable progress in the civil rights movement. The Freedom Riders showed determination to fight against segregation and injustice, which influenced many more protests leading to equality for all.